Welcome to the EUROCALL podcast. I'm your host for the day, Geoff Carr, at旭川City University in Hokkaido, and I am joined today by Chris Fry from the EUROCALL AI SIG and formerly of the British Council of Barcelona. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, very pleased to be here.
We're very happy to have you here. I know some of our listeners will have heard you or seen you, more properly, at our symposium at the end of March this year. You presented, but a lot of people will not. Could I ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, the things that I'm uh, interested in perhaps all started when I was at university way back in 1966 or something. Um, I did courses on linguistics that perhaps opened up my interest in language teaching. I remember attending a course that was about the language of bees and to what extent the language of bees constituted a language. And it was fascinating. It wasn't part of my course. I just went to it because it sounded so interesting. So maybe that's the first sign of any interest in ELT.
That's a lot of. It sounds very similar to how I got into teaching ELT and into call eventually as well, Chris. I went to school studying history and public speaking, and I took a linguistics course with a great professor, and she became a friend, and it was just fascinating, all of it. So it was outstanding. You took that interest, and after graduation from university, you went to Spain, uh, and then you started working for the British Council there after some time. How did all that come about?
Um, I went to Madrid first of all. Um, Being the capital of Spain, it seemed the place to go to. And anyway, I knew some people from Madrid, so it was obviously the best place to go. And I had a fabulous time working at a little language school called La Casa Inglesa, which no longer exists. Um, but I had great fun. But my original plan was to go to South America, but I thought my Spanish was not really good enough. So I thought one more year, and I looked at Barcelona and Sevilla and thought, well, one of those two would be a great place to go to. And then I looked at the number of language schools in each of these cities, and Barcelona had loads of language schools, and Sevilla had only a couple. So I chose Barcelona for totally spurious reasons,
Oh,
really. Um,
well, it seems like it was a brilliant choice given what Barcelona has become, really what it already was, I suppose. And you went to work for the British Council in Barcelona?
I started working for uh, the the Spanish state language school, and I worked there for 4 or 5 years.
Hmm.
Um, and I was very lucky because I was invited to become the head of the English department there after 1 year. So I had a really interesting job there. And it involved teacher training. Of course, it didn't involve call because we didn't have computers. We did have a language lab, though,
Hmm.
and I was fascinated to have access to a language lab and spent a lot of time preparing materials for that.
Was the language lab, you think, one of the things that led you into an interest in call?
Yeah, I think so. It was a technical thing. I'd go in there, I'd record things for my students to use later on. Um, and I just grabbed this opportunity to use this technology that, I'd heard about, but I'd never had the possibility of using before.
And then after teaching in Barcelona for so long and establishing yourself there, you, well, you became involved in the EUROCALL AI SIG. Were you involved with EUROCALL before, or how did you get involved with AI like this?
Um, but I perhaps was the person who started computer computer-assisted language learning. I think because my brother had a Spectrum computer back in 1981, uh,
It's going away back. My.
going way back. And I got one too, and I started writing a few programs for it. And I started getting other people interested in that. And then I was very lucky. I was sent by the British Council, Barcelona, to have a sort of tour of England, seeing specialists in call. And I met Michael Carrier, who was at I don't know which school he was at then, Eurocenters, I think, in Cambridge. I went up to a conference in the north of England, met lots of people who were very influential at the time, and then brought that back to Barcelona, which gave a sort of impetus to the use of computers in classes.
So you started using computers in classes at more than 25 years ago, would you say? More than 30 years ago?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I would have thought sort of 1984, maybe
Ah,
something
very,
like that.
very Orwellian there, computers in class. There you go.
Yes,
All right.
yes, yes.
That's excellent. One thing I noticed in looking for some of the work that you've done online, Chris, was that you've been blogging since about 2010 on a blog that's called One Way to Teach English as a Foreign Language. Did you start this after retirement, or was this something you'd done before that?
I think I was still working because I retired in about 2015, 2016, the end of that, the very beginning of 2016. So I had blogged before retiring. It was just somewhere to put down things that I thought about that um, maybe other people would be interested in.
Well, I did note there's an awful lot of speech to text work in there, and it's something that you've been involved with for a very long time. But you moved from an English speaking country and you've spent most of your professional life, all your professional life, really,
Yeah,
in a
yeah.
country with two other uh, languages or two other official languages, I suppose, Spanish and Catalan. Uh, how important was it for you to become fluent in those languages, and what kind of benefits did you see from that?
Well, in the school that I worked for, the government school, we taught many languages. So whenever there was a meeting of the whole school, it would always be in Spanish.
Hmm.
And my Spanish wasn't brilliant, but I was able to express my opinion, to, I think, even be persuasive on occasion in a foreign language. Um, and but then when I went to the British Council, everything was in English. So
Mm.
I think my Spanish deteriorated because I wasn't using it so much.
Oh,
Um,
that can happen for sure. Uh, as a language teacher, teaching, I'm presuming, mostly Spanish or Catalan speaking students, did you find it an advantage, or do you consider it an advantage for language teachers to be able to speak the language of their students?
I think so, very much so. I had some books about the comparative grammar and comparative phonology of English and Spanish that were very persuasive. That it's worth knowing the two sides of the coin to help students move from one to the other. Um, yeah, I think it helps.
Mm. I
You
can
have
definitely.
another weapon
Another weapon
to.
in your arsenal, right? Uh, do you think it's more motivational for students when they know that they can get support from you when they need it in that language?
Um, I think the situation in Spain changed so much in the period that I was teaching there. When I first arrived, there were huge numbers of absolute beginners. Um, but by the time I retired, there were sort of just one or two classes of absolute beginners, and most of the teaching was at much higher levels. I think having some Spanish can help a lot at teaching lower levels, um, provides a shortcut on vocabulary and even maybe on grammar. But I use very, very little Spanish and no Catalan in my teaching.
Join Geoff and Chris in part 2 after the break.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. And in the second half of our podcast, we're going to ask Chris Fry to tell us about his most recent work, which has been with speech to text using AI as part of the system. Chris has presented on this extensively recently at the EUROCALL AI SIG collaboration and then at IA just a few weeks ago. Chris, can you tell us about how you got interested in this and what you have come to understand, how the system you've put together for speech to text with AI?
I think my interest in speech to text comes partly out of the fact that I've got hundreds, if not thousands, of recordings of my students speaking in English. And I'd always dreamt of being able to do something with these recordings. Um, and then, of course, when speech to text arrived, you thought, wow, if I'd had that available 10 years ago, it would have been incredible.
Mm.
So I started looking at that. But the other influence was our granddaughter. I got her to read some guided readers and then retell the story. And that perhaps was the first time that I actually used speech to text. I got ChatGPT to produce an improved version of the transcript of what she said. Um, and she, on one occasion, I think we got 5 different versions for her to listen to. And she said, "Oh no, that's the closest to what I was saying."
Hmm.
Um,
So
so that's
speech to
getting
text,
me really interested.
as a tool for speech, but also evaluating comprehension and having students participate, have some agency in deciding what language is the closest to what they meant. That's interesting. You've put together a system that uses TurboScribe AI and ChatGPT now for that. Do you do something similar with other students as you do with, or you did with your granddaughter?
I haven't ever been able to use this with any students apart from my granddaughter.
Oh my.
Um, it's purely theoretical. I use recordings that my students made 10 years ago and then do a sort of simulation of what they might have been able to do had they had speech to text and chat GPT available back then. Um, and I'm convinced that it's got a lot of value.
Hmm.
Um, but I can't prove that myself. I hope other people will take it up and tell me how useful it's been.
Absolutely. Have you heard any feedback yet from people who have attended your workshops and put it into practice?
Sadly, I haven't. I've had people say that it was a wonderful presentation and things like this, but I haven't had people say, I tried it with my students and they loved it. That would be the thing I long to hear.
Hmm. Well, I certainly hope so. We will put all your contact details in the notes for this podcast, so anyone who wants to try it will be able to contact you and ask questions. I know you're on various platforms. I am also uh, telling you that I'm going to be asking some of the interns who I use in my English courses to trial this with some of my smaller classes, my seminar classes, and as we get some results and data back from that, I'll be sure to let you know how it works out.
That would be wonderful. Really wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll be happy to do it. It'll be a lot of fun. Okay, so let's see. Your presentation title on this is You Can Get Feedback Every Time You Speak. And I'm wondering why you chose that.
Um, it was very carefully selected. I wanted to put the emphasis on the student's benefit rather than the teacher's benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, of course, the teacher benefits as well by the student getting the feedback, but the person who really benefits mostly is the student. Um, so you can get feedback every time you speak, or your students can get feedback every time they speak. It was a choice between the two. I thought the direct, you can get feedback every time you speak.
You're speaking directly to the student there. All right, well,
Yeah,
I'll keep that in mind as I teach this to my students and have them work on it. That's a great idea. But let's see, this is something more recent for you because of ChatGPT and the speech to text tools that are available. Sorry for us now, but previously you've been involved very heavily in extensive reading. In fact, still are now.
I I went to the special interest group on extensive reading in the afternoon at Edinburgh, and I went to the special interest group on language and technology in the morning because of having the two interests, and I was quite torn between which to go to. Um, I'm I'm convinced that the benefits of extensive reading are exactly what Christine Nuttall was referring to when she said the best way to learn a foreign language is to go and live in a country where the language is spoken. The next best way is to read extensively in that
Mm.
language.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I stand by that. Um, I started buying I think I started by lending one or two of my books to students at sort of intermediate level. And then I started buying graded readers from the local bookshops in Barcelona and lending them to my students. And students loved it. Um, and they'd never seen this before, this idea of borrowing books from the teacher, um, and the teacher knowing enough about the books to be able to actually say something to them about
Mm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
I loved when I discovered The Old Man and the Sea by Hemingway, which is not simplified in any way, but is simple and short, and
Hemingway's
students loved it.
sentences, yeah, Hemingway's sentences are famous for being pared down to as simple a version as he could possibly get them. He was always looking for something else to cut, famously. So that seems like a really great choice. You you
Mhm.
continued now in extensive reading, even attending JALT ER meetings, even though we're on opposite sides of the globe.
Yeah, it's very fortunate that the time actually fits in. It's sort of 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock in the morning for me, and I think it's sort of 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon for you. Um, but when I discovered that these Zoom meetings took place every month, I was delighted because I've got no one else to talk to about extensive reading because in Europe it's not a popular thing. Um,
That surprises me so much, perhaps because of being raised in the United States, where our image of literature, or let me limit it to myself, my image of literature was something that we got from Europe, and that Europe was a country, a continent of writers and readers. Is that no longer the case?
I think the idea of simplifying books to make them accessible to students is something that teachers here don't think is necessary.
Hmm.
It is necessary. I think using the same sort of ladder system that's used in Japan, um, is the way to bring students up from a relatively low level of reading comprehension
Hmm.
to being able to read um, original novels.
Mm.
But by chance, yesterday on the underground, I met an ex-student of mine who was one of my star students. She read voraciously, and she borrowed books, and she really enjoyed um, some books. I can never remember the name of the author. Um, the number one detective, lady detective series. She read simplified versions of these,
Hmm.
but she was in an intermediate course, and she then borrowed the original versions of these books and read, I think, two original versions of Alexander McCall's books.
Oh,
And
my.
she wasn't the only student who read original versions at that sort of level, at intermediate level. But
Well,
it was people who read huge quantities reached
mhm.
that level.
I absolutely agree with that approach. It's something I've used for my own language learning, and I also use that with upper level classes here at my university. The current upper level literature based course that I'm teaching uses Tolkien's The Hobbit, which is a, a little bit older in terms of language now, and so that presents some significant challenges for students, which is one reason why I have interns come in to help support the students in class. And also, I'm beginning to work with AI to create some slightly simplified versions of key passages that help students to understand things better. I still have to supplement that reading with student reading the book in their native language and then coming in to reading it in Japanese as well. But the students seem extremely proud of being able to read and understand what's going on in the English language version. And it does support exceptional development in the students' ability to comprehend and express themselves. That's what I've found.
I think this is the remarkable thing that research shows, that it's not just gains in reading comprehension and vocabulary. Students actually do better in public examinations. They speak better. They have better listening comprehension. It's improvements across the board. So it's so worthwhile and so valued in the Far East
Mm.
and so undervalued in Europe. I can't understand it. At least Italy has set up an extensive reading group. Um,
Well, maybe
so
it,
I hope one day
yeah.
I'll go to Italy and have a conference there.
Well, I suppose that could be your next language to pick up, so you could participate fully in the conference, right?
Yeah,
Italian's not too far off Spanish, I suppose, so you're probably already fairly good. You get a good base. All right.
yeah, I think I'd pick up
Yeah.
that quickly.
ChatGPT's taken us all by surprise. It's just a storm of new things that we can do in education, and also a storm of things we have to adapt to in education, because suddenly many assignments which were extremely useful, essay assignments and student created writing of all kinds, are now called into question. What kind of applications beyond speech to text do you see for what we can do with ChatGPT going forward, Chris?
As I said, I'm more interested in how ChatGPT can help students rather than how it can help teachers
Hmm.
prepare materials. I think there are enough gap fill exercises in the world. We don't need any more. Thank you. Um, I've never believed in reading comprehension questions except as a sort of memory test. I tended to use them a week after or a few days after we'd done a reading. Um, I'd then say, okay, can you just go through these questions with your neighbor and check that you all know the answers?
Hmm.
Um, it wasn't testing their comprehension, it was testing their memory as much as anything, and giving them something to talk about, because that
Hmm.
was what I wanted.
You want to get them interacting and focused on the material instead of focusing on a particular exercise all by themselves.
Yeah.
Hmm. That sounds a lot like a kind of task-based language learning, which I think was something you wrote about very recently, having just watched a plenary on that at IATEFL.
Yes, it's not chance that the first plenary I watched the recording of was on task-based learning, task-based language teaching, because it's something that's always fascinated me. I remember back in 1980 something, I got up early in the morning to go to a plenary by Prabhu, who was talking about task-based language teaching. None of my colleagues bothered to get up as early as that. And I said, "You're mad, you're mad. This guy's a genius. You've got to hear him." And yeah, it was a memorable experience.
Mm.
Um, I didn't really base my teaching on task-based language teaching, but the most important thing in my lessons was when students had to retell stories to somebody who had never heard the story. So it was genuinely communicative.
Mm.
I fixed this by sending half the students out of the class for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, while the others watched a video or did a listening or were exposed to some language, which they then had to transfer to the people who hadn't experienced it. And of
Mm.
course, I got them to record themselves, and this is how I've got hundreds and hundreds of student recordings speaking communicatively. Um,
Right. So that sounds something like the example that you wrote about in your essay, where I believe it was Neil McMillan talking about using a language based task on how to solve the problem of alligators in the underground of New York City. Now, is that something that he asked all the attendees there at the plenary to do?
well, we didn't actually do it, but he suggested that this is the sort of thing that you could set up as a real life problem,
Mm-hmm.
um, and get people in small groups to talk about it, and then to feed back to the other groups. And if I was doing it, I would like to have somebody giving a presentation of these ideas and recording that. And
Mm.
that's when I would get them, if I was doing it today, to use these 9 steps that I suggested to get feedback on their speaking. I usually used monologues in class rather than uh, conversations between a group of students. So mostly students were recording themselves giving a monologue. You could hear in the background the other person saying, uh-huh, mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And you could certainly see live the eye contact that was taking place, showing that it was real communication.
Right. Hmm. And the feedback that your nine-step prompt, or we call everything a prompt now because of ChatGPT, but the process involves working on errors and then correcting them and suggesting better ways to rephrase and say the same thing.
Yes, for various reasons, since I've started talking about these ideas, my emphasis is moving away from the error aspect to the improvement aspect. And I think this fits in very much with what people are saying about emergent language, that it's not just noting that that wasn't quite right, it's what you do to suggest the student can make it better.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I I studied when I studied Catalan, I used some of these techniques with regarding errors. So I used an app which corrected my writing, but it didn't correct it. It underlined where the problems were. And then
Mm,
you got the chance to think, oh, I wonder. Oh, of course, yeah. And then you realized what you'd done wrong or didn't. But at least you had a chance to correct yourself before you were given the correction.
mm,
And that's why I included the first step, which was identifying errors.
mm. That makes
Mark
a
them.
great deal of sense to me. Sorry, I just got a little bit excited listening to you say that because this year for my student uh, EFL journals, I have continued historical practice of me giving direct feedback to the students, students giving each other feedback based on several set patterns that I provide for them so that they can develop the habit, and also having interns give feedback. I've now supplemented that with a couple of customized chatbots that are
Mm,
limited to doing exactly what it is you're talking about. They don't correct feedback for students. They let the students put the feedback in, and then they give just two suggestions on how one or another aspect of the feedback could be improved, and then they instruct the student, okay, go ahead and try to improve that. So far, the response has
mm.
been quite good, and I'm looking forward to gathering some data on it, see how it works out.
Yes, I think identifying errors, giving the student a chance to self-correct, at least mentally, but even better if they actually do it
Mm,
in writing. Um, but I feel that the improvements that in the other steps are perhaps even more important. I was very impressed to see the nature of the improvements on the little example I gave in my presentation. Um, that they weren't huge changes, and they certainly didn't um, make improvements to the overall structure because the structure was very simple. You were
mm-hmm.
basically telling a story. There's a beginning and there's a middle and there's an end.
Right.
Um, anything. It's not like the argumentative essay where you've got introduction, you've got
Thesis
different stages.
statements and all this. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
true. Chris, how do you assess that improvement? You, in your process, you talk about improvements at a slightly higher level and an even higher level. Do you have a I don't know, a calculus to evaluate the amount of improvement or level of
Um,
improvement?
I gave instructions, but I gave a prompt to ChatGPT to use the European CEFR scale.
Mm,
But I've since experimented, and it's perfectly happy to do that with the CEFR scale, with the Pearson GSE scale, with the American ACTFL scale. Is that it?
ACTFL, I am going to say yes and possibly come back and correct myself. I reserve the right to do that.
And the IELTS scale as well,
Yes.
because I'm quite interested in the IELTS market, which is very big in many parts of the world. And
Mm.
therefore, if you could ask ChatGPT to work on the IELTS scale, that could be very useful for people hoping to up their grade, at least in the speaking.
Mm. That's been something that I've struggled with myself when it comes to evaluating student writing, because the various scales at which you can identify the level of the knowledge are, uh, well, they're just very diverse. But the reading scales, like something like a Lexile rating, seem to be more broadly agreed upon. And I've used those and compared the Lexile ratings available through the actual companies that have created Lexile ratings versus what chatbots can provide. And the chatbots are doing okay on that, and I
Oh,
imagine that there's so much information in their training knowledge base about the different measures you just mentioned, the CEFR or the IELTS or the, let's say, the AC TEFL, they're it just gives them uh, an excellent sample to work from to give an evaluation. I think we'll need to have somebody formally measure that to see whether it's as accurate as we hope it is, though. I don't know.
Yes, I constantly do sort of tests on how well different systems are at grading things. I've compared ChatGPT with Copilot, with DeepSeek, with Claude. Um, in general, ChatGPT comes out ahead, but
Mm.
DeepSeek is pretty close too. Um, that's always been with the CEFR scale.
Hmm.
Um,
I noticed one or two articles on your blog that had the DeepSeek tag. Is it in one of those that you have the information from some of this testing that you've done?
it could be, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
I think I posted something about how well these different tools did at evaluating things.
Okay, I'll have to go back and look at
I'm
that later.
personally, I think if it's good enough, it's good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Hmm.
It's not brain surgery here where it actually has to be perfect. Um, it's helpful. If it's
Hmm.
helpful, it's good enough.
Right. All right. That makes a lot of sense, Chris. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that you have done and the recent work that you have been doing. You are more active post retirement, I think, than many people who are still working are. Uh, what do you attribute that to? I mean, do you have any secret that you can give to those of us who are approaching retirement on how to be successful?
Um, it is just amazing that you have a lot of time on your hands when you're retired. So you can go to conferences, you can read all the posts and things like this. Other people have got to actually do a day's work.
Ah, okay.
So a lot of time available to do things. I read avidly, I experiment avidly in my free time. And as I say, I've got a lot of free time.
Mm. Well, that leads in quite perfectly to our wrap up, Chris. I'd like to ask if you have a couple of tools or books or resources that you might recommend to some of our listeners from all this free time that you've had, of course.
Um, I'm a huge fan of TurboScribe AI. I think it does the job it claims to do extremely well. It's very generous in its free account. You get three recordings every 24 hours, and they can be up to half an hour long. So that's wonderful. I alternate between that and rev.com, which I think offers 180 minutes a month. Um, and that's a bit more flexible. So if I've had my three with TurboScribe, I can always go to rev.com.
Hmm.
Rev.com has an interesting verbatim option because they've done a lot of work with medical records and legal documents or legal testimony where you actually have to have written down what the person said, not what you thought they said.
So no
Um,
correction, no
no,
elision or anything, just precisely the sounds that were made.
yeah. And the ums and ahs should be in there as well. And
Uh,
that's quite interesting from a language learner's point of view
that
to
sounds like
see
it could
that
be very
even native
useful.
speakers use ums and ahs.
I think I might be faintly horrified at what my recording on rev.com would come out at. I'm going to have to try that. Thank you. All right. Those sound great, Chris. Thank you very much. Before we finish up today, I'd like to remind everyone out there who's listening that in just a few weeks, the JALTCall Forum at PanSig 2025 will be happening. We have a panel of 5 people who will be discussing some of the latest developments in call, particularly AI, I think. It'll be on Saturday the 17th of May between 11:30 and 12:30 p.m. in Building 3. Room still to be announced. And please also join us at JALT-CALL 2025 at Tokyo University of Science at the Katsushika campus, July 18th through 20th. And early bird registration is still open and will be until May 31st. So get in there while the prices are low. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your language teaching journey, your language learning journey, and the technology journey here. It's really been a pleasure. I've enjoyed talking with you a lot.
It was a pleasure for me too. Thank you, Geoff.
All right. Thank you very much. And everyone out there, we'll see you again in a few weeks for the May studio episode of the JALT-CALL podcast. Have a great day, everyone. Goodbye.